Everyone, my name is Raphael Dabdon. I am a poet, researcher, editor, translator based in Pretoria. I'm Italian, but I've been living in South Africa for 18 years, and I have the honor to coordinate and facilitate this panel today on African or perhaps South African poetry journals. I will start by introducing my friends and guests for today, give you a little bit of biographical information about them, and then we will start with some poems that they will read for us, and then we will get into the conversation itself. I will start by introducing Sindiswa Busuku, a creative writer and a lecturer in the Department of English Literary Studies at the University of Cape Town, currently reading for a creative writing PhD at the University of Witwatersrand. She has published various poems in local and international poetry journals, and her debut poetry collection, Loud and Yellow Laughter, published by Botsotso, was the winner of the 2018 Ingrid Jonker Prize for Poetry. She's also the editor-in-chief of New Contrast Literary Journal. Welcome, Cindy. Our second speaker is Dr. Susanna Sachs, who is assistant professor of English at Howard University, where she teaches courses in contemporary poetry, digital cultures, and Afro-diasporic literatures. She's the author of a very important book, Networked Poetics, The Digital Turn in Southern African Poetry, published by the University of Massachusetts Press in 2024. Welcome, Susanna. Vangile Gantsho is a poet, healer, and co-founder of Impepo Press. She has performed her work in 3 continents. Her work appears in various journals and anthologies, and she's the author of 2 poetry collections, Red Cotton and Undressing in Front of the Window. She's also the newly appointed editor of New Coin Poetry Journal. Hi, Vangi. Last but not least, Quaz Roodt. He facilitates the poetry program for the University of Johannesburg Arts Academy and is the author of 1 chapbook and 1 collection of poetry. Quaz's work appears in numerous local and international anthologies and journals, and he has performed his poetry at various international festivals in Swaziland, Zimbabwe, Mauritius, Botswana, and Brazil. He is also the editor and founder of the online poetry magazine poetrypotion.com. Thank you, Quaz. Also, thank you for inviting us here as one of the curators of Poetry Africa. Thank you to Poetry Africa Festival for having us. And as I said, we will break the ice today with a reading of some poems from the poetry journals that you guys edit. Vangi, do you want to start, perhaps?
Okay, I'm happy to begin. So I'm going to read from the first issue that I edited for New Coin, which is the June 2025 issue, which is volume 61, number 1, sorry. And the poem I'd like to read is the opening poem by Esina Kondebeni, which is in conversation with Lucille Clifton, entitled, I Wandered Off into the Desert. I wandered off into the desert. I did not pack a bag or a hat or boots or a tent. I did not leave a message for the ocean. I rode camels and I learned the secrets of the world, myself, the earth, and the strangers I met. I walked the sand dunes until my nose and my skin dried up, until my feet had corns and calluses. I thought I'd die from thirst and tears, the barren land, hunger, to eat the world and all its men. It was a fever dream. I could not command the unyielding stone to turn into bread, but I took all the devil offered. I threw myself off the highest peak, daring the angels to let me fall. They caught me. I climbed up again so I could worship him in exchange for my power and my glory, my hollow victory. Some nights I sat under the sky and learned to appreciate the heartbeat of life that is faint, the moon and the stars, gentler than the sun, which warmed me 1 minute and burnt me the next. I wandered off into the desert to learn that all of it had always been mine, the dry, arid, hostile, scorching earth, the vast, living, ever-changing, tempestuous sea, the salt and light, all mine.
Thank you, Vangi. What an opening poem for your first journal to edit. Thank you very much. Very powerful poem. Quaz, would you go next?
Yes, it would be my pleasure. Thank you very much, Raphael, and everyone else for having me here. So I do need to just go back and say one thing. I am not the founder of Poetry Potion. That's Duduzile Mabaso. She just brought me on a little later on to do some editing work. So yeah, actually a very big shout out to her, because so much passion in just holding it and creating it with absolutely nothing coming back in return for the passion of it. So yeah, I'm representing Poetry Potion. And this is also the featured poem on Poetry Potion. So if you visit the website today, it's the first poem that you are confronted with. And it went on online on the 1st of February, 2024. And the idea was the poem will be taken down and another featured poem will be put on once the situation that the poem itself kind of speaks to changes, which is the poem will speak for itself. Palestinian blood is a cruel antidote to the dreamlike slumber white supremacy has over the world. A blood sacrifice to hold a pale mirror up so the world can see itself soberly, hung over and bleeding. Palestinian children drinking water from puddles. Do they see the moon in their hands? Grinding animal feed into bread. Do they hold the night as they eat? While Zionist warmongers produce magically awakened straw puppets, Hamas, they shout like a circus clown to elicit the correct response that means more land, more money, more bombs for the Zionist meat grinder, into which small children are fed daily. The very sacrifice to the white gods, the self-same sobering shout that will call the world to awaken. It's a poem titled Broken Spell by Charles Landsberg. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Quaz. Unfortunately, published a year ago, right? But still, unfortunately, very relevant because things not only haven't changed, but they've gone from bad to worse. Wow. So after this, we close this first round with Cindy, the editor of New Contrast. To you, Cindy.
Thank you. Okay, so I am going to read a poem from our upcoming issue 209, and it's a poem by Salia Bamji, and it's called My Grandfather's House. The house lived to us for mourning, became a breathing thing. It took the grieving in, masticating them in the living room where he lay. Peristatals pulsed people through into spare rooms where the villi of fraying carpet absorbed condolences for nutrition. Now there is no one left to juice. Who will buy it in the state? The skirtings in splinters, the children falling out over the curled ceilings and the rising damp. This house left to us eats its own paint. Thank you.
Thank you. Also by a great poet, also winner like you of the Ingrid Jonker Prize in the past. Thank you, Cindy. Thank you so much. It's always great to start with poetry because this is why we are here. This is what we're going to discuss today. Poetry as it is presented, as it is discussed, as it is disseminated in journals, in poetry journals. But obviously the conversation will go beyond that. And one speaker that I wanted to invite for the great studies that she has done in this field is Susanna Sachs. So I'll start with you, Susanna, with my first question. Unlike the other panelists, you're not the editor of a poetry journal, but like them, you're a scholar of poetry, right? A very innovative one for the matter. I just finished reading your seminal study, Network Poetics, the digital turn in Southern African poetry. And I wanted you to be part of this panel because I think your inputs will be essential in the discussion that we are about to have on poetry in the digital era in particular, because obviously, this is the age in which we are living. So for the viewers who are not familiar with your book, with your work, can you briefly illustrate what is the focus of your research, Susanna?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for inviting me. It's like an honor to be here and to be learning and with and from you all. And thank you for those opening poems. I think they illustrate so brilliantly what it is that draws us to poetry, right? The way that it can shape our experiences, the way we make sense of the world, both individually and collectively, the way that it distills into these powerful moments, so much of human experience. And that's kind of what Networked Poetics is about. It's a project about how poetry moves through the world, bonding communities, catalyzing political movements, and shaping public discourse. I have a copy here because I feel like I'm supposed to do that. But it's really, it's about the poetry itself and the way that it shapes our work, our lives. I really began kind of interested in how poetry and poetic language circulated through popular protest movements, actually in the mid-2010s, like fallism and This Flag in Zimbabwe. But as I was doing that, I started to explore how poets use social media and digital platforms to build community, and what that movement online means for the future of poetic forms. So like, if we're circulating our early drafts on WhatsApp groups, is poetry going to be a more regular part of daily life? Is the way we make poetry going to be informed by the way it feels to type on a phone, which I know for some people is expansive, for me it's very cramped? And how broadly shared is and are any one of those experiences? So in Network Poetics, I presume that most poetry reading and writing, and actually maybe most reading and writing in general, is happening online and on digital platforms. I'm actually really interested to hear if that aligns with or varies from others' experiences here. You know, we talk a lot about we're not reading anymore. I think we're reading a lot. We're just reading differently. But I really want to know if that's true. How do digital norms affect our expectations of poetry offline? If we get accustomed, right, to consuming literature as short form videos or image macros with text superimposed over images, right? We're always looking at those multimodal works. What does that mean for print poetry and how we read print poetry? So, or other forms. So like in one chapter, I write about actually Poetry Africa, and the way that the emphasis on performance poetry online has influenced the performance styles we see here over time. But my real hope in the book is to kind of push away from a sort of static reading of poetry that I think traditional studies of print works emphasize. You know, like, this is the work and it's been published, so we'll study it. And this is the one language that we all share and it's contained here. But instead, I really see poetry as like moving through the world, creating connections and resonances as it does so. And I think of it as kind of the language that we all share. At the same time, that language is shaped by these larger platforms, you know, like the squares here that are allowing us to talk to each other on this platform, to connect across time zones and moments, but then also keep us visually separated from each other. And so kind of in Network Poetics, I'm interested in exploring how those connections shape and are shaped by the platforms themselves, whether that's how Instagram informs open mics or how WhatsApp groups shape our networks. And I'm really looking forward here now to hearing how you as editors understand that interaction rate journals are these spaces of collaboration and connection. We're constantly moving back and forth. It's a chance to build relationships. But I also imagine that even as social media platforms and digital publication allow more regular communication, they're also impacting your work as editors, poets, teachers. So that's Network Poetics, but I'm really looking forward to these broader conversations as well.
Awesome. Thank you for this. And I really recommend the reading of this book to everyone who's interested in not just South African poetry or digital poetry, but poetry in general in the 21st century, because it's really a great study based on Southern Africa, of your field work in Southern Africa, but also very strong theoretically and with like a view of the future of poetry, because that's why, you know, from what you said, we can really feel how important will be your contribution in this conversation, because the editors that we have here will go into that. They edit journals that are quite different, similar in many ways, but also different. And so we'll talk about their present role as editor, their past role as editors. Quaz has been the oldest in the panel as an editor, and the future, obviously, of the future vision for their journal. So on this note, I'm going to start with you, Quaz, as the veteran in the game. When did you become editor of Poetry Potion, and what informed your decision to start this journey?
I was hired, Prof. They came and they gave me the job.
Well, good choice, because they were right.
Yeah, I mean, it stemmed from being in the space with poets, with Za over the last Zamantungwa Duduzile, who I mentioned earlier on, who's the founder of Poetry Potion, and us kind of knowing each other from around the Johannesburg scene and understanding what the scene looks like, who the voices are that kind of pop out. I think we've sort of walked the same journey through from about the early 2000s, about 2002 up until now, you know, and when she initially brought me on, she founded Poetry Potion in 2007. So in 2 years' time, it's turning 20 years. It's been online for 18 years. And for the first 10 years of that, she had been running it basically herself, with people popping in and out to help with sort of the editorial baggage that comes with doing both print and the online platform. But for me, it was an easy yes, because I knew exactly what it was that she was doing, and I always saw Poetry Potion not as just a journal, but also as an extension of the community that I was part of. And so it didn't exist as this sort of prestigious literary monolithic thing that she's doing. It was just an extension of someone in my community that's creating more opportunities for someone else, you know. And by the time she asked me to come on board as an editor, that was also basically the foundation of the type of work that I was doing, which was more concerned with community building and creating space for others to come in and perform. And Poetry Potion itself was also just an extension of that. And I think I've treated my editorial journey as exactly that. This is community. And whether I bring people into the community or I take the journal out to the community, I need to figure out how it exists within this community. And it was an interesting process, because you get to deal with poems from seasoned veterans who are, you know, revered around the world. And then also one from Jason DeForce from Bloemfontein, who it's his first poem and he's 14 years old. And you can see that this poem deserves just as much room on the website as the other, you know. And I think that for me has been the beauty of the journey, but also the work that it has done for me in terms of refining my eye and understanding where a poem rests, where it comes from, and what it could possibly mean in the context of all the thousands of other poems that are on the website. So yeah, I came on board because Za wanted me to work on it, and I was ecstatic when she did, because it's such a beautiful addition to the community work that we do already.
Thanks for that. And that's also how I see Poetry Potion, because the first time I got to know it was a printed copy that I got in Newtown somewhere. So for me, it was an extension of what was happening in the open mics, you know, and the poetry events. And to see, you know, a journal born out of that experience was really, you know, fascinating. And thanks for the good job that you've done. As you say, you have created this intergenerational translingual community in Poetry Potion. So congratulations also for the achievement of the 20 years to you and the rest of the team. Next, I want to ask Cindy. Cindy, how long have you been editor of New Contrast now? New Contrast is a literary journal, so the focus is on poetry, but it's not only that. It's got artworks, prose. So how did that start, and how it has been so far?
Thanks for this. This is really lovely to be in conversation with all of you and to talk about my favorite topic, literature. I started last year, I think around April maybe last year, and I was invited. New Contrast at the time was going through a rocky place, and we weren't really sure if it was going to continue to exist. There were talks about, you know, the sort of instability going on there, lots of changing editors, and just lots of changes, financial changes, all the things that literary journals go through. New Contrast seemed to be experiencing them sort of compounded and converging all at once. And so I was really honored that they asked me to join as a guest editor. I wasn't sure if that was just so that I got to dip my toe in and then decide whether I could do this long term or if it wasn't really my cup of tea. But I did it as guest editor. We spoke, and I said I could do this long term, and they were thrilled. And the only reason that I could really do it long term is because there was already a small team in place with a managing editor and editorial assistant. So the three of us, myself, Neve, and Robin, worked really closely together, and we had there was good energy between the three of us. And then we were able to start growing it. But, you know, there were certain conversations that had to take place before I said yes to becoming the editor of New Contrast. I wanted real editorial independence, that the board and the editorial team did not overlap or infringe upon each other too much. So we fought hard to protect our independence, and yeah, and it was really important to bring back language editors, to bring back Xhosa and Afrikaans to the journal, because they were there, one of people on the team to support that sort of thing. So we really wanted to have as much independence and space to reimagine the journal on our own terms. And luckily the board agreed to give us that. And yeah, and then the rest is history. So this is my second year in. So I still feel very new to this whole thing of being editor, but so far so good.
Thank you, Cindy. As a reader of the journal, I can say that you've done a great job. The journal has changed for the better for me, for the reasons that you said. And it's also a great pleasure for me. I noticed it just now, to be honest, that to have three of my favorite poets as the editors of three of, you know, the most important poetry journals in the country, if not the three most important. And then we also talk about the challenges that you talked about, because poetry journals are always on the brink of disappearing. Many have disappeared in recent years. And, you know, we know the problems that you guys face, but it's good that for now, at least they are in good hands. Next to speak will be Vangi, also the most recent in this role, the newest in this role of poetry editor, because you just got appointed a few months ago, right, as New Coin editor-in-chief. To you, Vangi.
Hi, Raphael, and thank you for inviting me to this conversation. It's a real privilege and an honor to speak to both Cindy and Quaz and Susanna, all three, and Susanna, and yourself. So I got appointed last year. I applied for the job, and then I went to the interview and did all that jazz. Um, and I think I wanted to do it because I felt I wanted to stretch myself, and I was also I hadn't interacted with New Coin, but I kind of felt like I wanted to know how the journal itself could be stretched, and in order to do that, I wanted to kind of get a better understanding of how it works, and also because I really genuinely love the editorial process. I enjoy editing work. Um, and I really love kind of listening to poetry and how it appears on the page and how it then rings in my ear. And so the process itself is something that I really kind of dance to. And so I was delighted to be able to join the New Coin team. And then obviously, I was probably a lot more idealistic than I was realistic about what that entailed. So we got our first issue out quite recently for the June 2025 issue. And so it was also quite significant because last year, unfortunately, New Coin wasn't able to release any issues. And that spoke a lot to the strain that New Coin had taken in terms of the lack of support for the editor. And so I was thankful because I got to come on board with Molly Brown, who is the assistant editor, and we're still looking for a reviews editor. But there was the beginning of a team, and then obviously we have support from the editorial board, and we have support from the ISCA from Rhodes University. So yeah, That's the journey.
Yes, thank you, Vangi. And also as an editor myself, I know how much work that entails. You know, Cindy and Quaz have confirmed that. And curiously, I met with Kyle Allen, no, the previous editor, last year in December, and he told me how exhausted he was, how burned out it was, and frustrated about, you know, not being able to finish what he had started, because as you say, it was really overwhelming for me, for him, because of the lack of, you know, infrastructure that the journal had. So I'm happy that now that you have jumped on board, they have noticed that, and probably they've put you in a better position to lead the journal. And I'm looking forward also to read the first issue that you have edited. I haven't done it yet. We'll talk about the upcoming issue as well. But I have another round of questions for you, and that will lead the conversation into also the topics that Susanna has studied. So as I mentioned, your journals are slightly different. No, Vangi, we heard also it's the more institutional, your journal. No, it has a academic institution behind it. And then Cindy in between, and then Quaz with the more, you know, independent type of publication. So Poetry Potion, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but it's basically fully digital, although there are old issues, now printed issues that we all collect as collectors. And it's open access, right? New Coin is partly blended in the sense that the printed issues are available by subscription. The digital issues from the year 2000 to 2024, 25 can be purchased online, but there is a website where you can download old issues from free, not from the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, etc. So there is a free access section to the journal. New Contrast is the most traditional, you know, between brackets of the three journals, the one that sort of in its structure recalls more the, you know, the more established American, you know, old journals. It works by subscription, and both the printed and digital issues can only be purchased online. There is no free access, and the older editions can only be accessed via contacting the manager. So I'm gonna start asking Cindy, and then the question is the same for the three of you. Do you think that there will be changes in this format, in the format of your journal in the future? And perhaps maybe social media will play a bigger part in the marketing of your journal? Or are you happy with the journal's current channels of distribution and dissemination?
Yeah, no. It's a good question, and I'm really happy to talk about it because, yeah, new contrast is quite traditional. But one of the things that when I took on the role of editor, one of the things that I wanted to see New Contrast do is I wanted it to work harder to be more Pan-African and to be less Cape Townian, because it has been sort of relegated into a very sort of white Cape Townian UCT type world. And I wanted it to definitely attract work from the rest of the country and not be so Cape Townian based, but also then to start attracting work from the rest of the continent, which will again require language editors who speak Arabic, Swahili, etc. But another one of the priorities that I had for New Contrast was this thing of not being able to get older versions of the journal, that it hadn't been digitized at all. And so we are currently working, so I'm happy to answer this question because we're making
that's
moves.
great news for us as readers, as you know,
Yeah,
lovers of the journal.
So our new the new chair of our board, Habiba Badarun, has taken over, and Keith, our former chair, has a huge treasure trove of our archive. And we were going to just donate it to a library or something, but we actually decided to hold on to it so that we can start the process of digitizing. And so we're working on getting grant money and getting funding for that process. We're not sure, you know, we will have to probably partner up with a university institution. So that's still up for discussion as to who we might partner with. But we want it to be open access. We insist actually that because New Contrast has been started in the 1960s, in 1960. And so all the archive that we have, we definitely are working towards digitizing and making open access. so that, and the way in which social media works with us, I mean, we've had a learning curve when it comes to social media. We realize how much we can really build community through social media. And so the current model of being a subscriber and being able to get the hard copies and the digital copies, that's, we're going to hold on to that. But what we've also I've started talking to the website designer, and we've decided to make at least 10% of every issue public, open access. So we are working on the website right now so that at least a few poems, a few prose pieces, maybe one interview, maybe one piece of criticism, you can click on it and you can read it just as a taster for the journal to hopefully attract more audiences. So those are some of the things that we're working on at the moment.
Thank you. And knowing your also activism as a literary scholar and as a poet, I knew you would drive also these changes. And I'm very happy because at least if there is some free content and then the digital archive, that will be a great addition to the journal. So thank you for giving us also this breaking news. I'm very happy to hear that. Quaz, I'm going to ask you next. Is there anything that you have for us cooking up for Poetry Potion? Any new project, any new idea, or pretty much you're going to continue the way you've done so far, which is, still great. But let's hear from you.
Yeah, no, we're not reinventing the wheel anytime soon, Prof. We might add some rims, And
can I just ask you something? One thing that I like about Poetry Potion is the podcast section, which is unique in this scenario. So maybe if you can say something about that.
Definitely. I mean, I think when that initial shift from page to screen happened, the world kind of found us online already, because we were early adopters in terms of getting a website and a literary website going in the early 2000s, So what we've had to do since then is also then figure, now that the world has converged and met us online, how else do we extend our reach, and that's where the idea of the podcast actually sprung from. What other space can the journal live in? The poets that have been featured on the journal, now we can get their voices and their poems and them reading the poems and do actual interviews with them, so that the content itself exists in a different space. And I think that's also the idea behind how we kind of approached, or at least I approached, how this thing exists going forward. You need to find almost a multi-medium approach to allowing the journal to have different lives, and then always have it feed right back into where you have it anchored. And for us, that is obviously online, and maintaining open access online, building a massive archive of what was initially supposed to be South African poets. And the beauty of life is you plan those things, and now we find it's poets from around the world. And now we have less poets from South Africa submitting, and more from East Asia and Europe and North America, and so the way in which the community has kind of shifted in what we thought we were doing, proved that this thing has a life of its own. And in a way in which we wanted to bring the South African audience and South African voices back was to take the poets that we have access to right around us every day, right here in South Africa, and do these interviews with them, and then put it on internet radio and on the website and on our social media, which is also, if you are intentional about it, becomes an extension as well of the journal. What does the Facebook page look like with the poems? What does the TikTok or the Twitter page look like? And once you start playing in that space, then you start reading one poem a day, and then you spend 90% of the rest of the day trying to figure out SEO, like search engine optimization. How can I make my thing link with the algorithm and make sure that it so the game you start playing is also completely different once you start being a little innovative, because the content on those spaces in particular are ruled by a completely different beast. So the prestige of Poetry Potion and how long it has existed, people generally don't care. They want to have you find them where they are. And that's the idea really with what we are doing. It's to make sure that all our social media, the work that's on the website, it exists in those spaces as well. But then to take it away from there and physically engage with, like I said earlier, on the community on the floor. So who's doing what, and how can we plug into those spaces as well, and have the work and not have the container be the important thing, which is this entity called Poetry Potion, but the content, which is the poetry and the community, and how can we have that exist, you know, outside of this thing that we use as the foundation or the anchoring space, which is the website. But it does ask you to look at how you present work and how you give it to the world a little different. Suddenly you are more concerned with what's in your tags when you do a post. You are more worried about what Google is looking for when what poets around the world are Googling, and then you need to make sure that whatever you have on your posts kind of reflects that, so that your thing pops up first. So there's an entire thinking that shifts away from, oh, this is a beautiful poem, to suddenly you are trying to manipulate an online audience back into your space. And I think it's fun to do, but if you're also a purist, it could be a little frustrating, because you know, for some of us, it's hey, if you want to read the poem, then you'll come find it. And I think the work as for me in particular, as the editor, is no. There's people that don't know the work exists, and I need to drag it in front of them and give them the option of liking and not liking it. And that means exploring these different things and putting a little bit of extra work and effort into making sure that the work lands there, you know. So as much as there's a post every day on the website, 2-3 posts per day, a prompt in the morning, a poem every day, behind the scenes, I'm also constantly working on manipulating and making sure that this poem, as many people on Facebook see it, as many people on Twitter see it, and there's all that other technical stuff that goes in the back behind that. So yeah, I'm trying to innovate, but I also realize how fast the world changes, you know, because suddenly you need to have a TikTok account. Because when I ask the students at UJ, hey, how do you guys consume poetry? You'd assume they go say the library, and they're like, oh no, TikTok, sir. And about 90% of them say that. And my question is, what do I do? Do I shrink away in disgust and go, oh no, you guys must pick up a book? Or do I say, well, then let me get these poems that are on Poetry Potion to you guys on TikTok, and then figure that out, you know? And I think that's the tug and pull of the work that we're doing. Once you get beyond all the other extra editorial work that you need to wade through.
Thank you, Quaz. I think these are pressing questions for us, because now that you mentioned that now everyone also from the rest of the world wants to contribute to Poetry Potion, it made me think that I work with the Mamba, now the Journal of African Haiku Network, and it was born as an fully African-centered journal, but immediately it turned out to be a journal where we receive submission from the rest of the world, and then it has become a global platform. So number one, nowadays, when you deal with a poetry journal, you have to figure out how to reach a global audience. And also, I noticed with my experience with that journal in particular, how the rest of the world is looking at Africa. They are interested in what Africa publishes, in what Africa has to offer. And so there is also this responsibility of making this journal, you know, available for everyone, but also, as you say, you know, up with the game, you know, in all the different platforms, and, you know, make it accessible also to a wider audience. It's not like in the past anymore, where a poetry journal was printed like 5,000 copies, and that would be distributed to the academics, to the points, and that it ended there. Nowadays, you have a global audience, you have a global readership, and then the game has changed, you know. So we'll also talk to Susanna about that soon. But let me also ask Vangi. Vangi, let's hear from Vangi, her contribution in this discussion. How are you shaping the journal? What are your plans for this editorial journey for you?
Thank you. I agree with both Cindy and Quaz that this is such an important question, because it kind of speaks to like where you meet something and then where you dream it forward. But before I kind of share that, I would like to also like apologize in advance, because the sounds of pitter patter are getting closer and closer from the stairs to the door. And so because we live in our very real everyday lives, if at any point you hear primary school girls, understand that this is where my life is right now. So the thing about New Coin is that yes, it exists online and exists primarily in physical form. It's not entirely fully digitalized yet. So not all issues are available through Sabinet, but a good a large portion. Like, so you can go quite far back for new coin, but we are in the process of making sure that it becomes available. We also are interested in making it quite open access. So especially earlier issues. So how do we ensure that people can get a hold of those issues without having to go through some kind of paywall or academic institution? And then because Newcoin is situated within the University of Rhodes or Rhodes University, what we find is that we also attract a number of poets who don't necessarily live in or are from South or Southern Africa. And we really are kind of focused on South or Southern Africa. It has been, I mean, it began kind of as South Africa, then extended to Southern Africa, and then went kind of back to South Africa. And we're really trying to make sure that it kind of maintains the Southern African reach. And so that's something that I'm definitely very passionate about. But because of the nature of an academic institution, you find yourself kind of getting a particular type of poet that subscribes and submits work. And so I think that the work over the years, particularly kind of beginning with Bonani Bila, and I mean, so this year we're celebrating 25 years since the all women's issue, which was quite multiracial and quite diverse. But it's been kind of like Newcoin has kind of traditionally entertained a very kind of specific readership and subscription. And so we're really trying to explore how to grow that. And in growing that, we're exploring how do we then kind of come into 2025 and have some kind of social media presence? How do we think about? I don't see us going onto TikTok anytime soon, but how do we think about Instagram Reels? And so how do we exist in a more kind of like have people kind of think about Newcoin as something that they both want to submit to, but also want to purchase for themselves. And we're also opening it up so that people don't necessarily have to have a full subscription for a year to get Newcoin. So you can get the issue itself. We're in current talks with independent bookstores around Cape Town and Johannesburg and Durban to try and see if they would be able to stock Newcoin. So we're basically really treating it as how would we use the model of publishing an individual poetry collection, and what goes into marketing it, and applying that within obviously the scope of what an institution like Rhodes allows for, but to kind of increase the readership, hopefully the subscription, but definitely like per issue purchase.
Thank you. Your challenge is also that's the one that you say now. It's also you work with an academic institution, which has its own dynamics as well. But it's also great to hear that you're moving in the direction of a more accessibility of the journal. If I'm not mistaken, though, it is already free access up to 1999, which is still good, But if you move towards open access for the other issues, that would be even better. So thank you for this. And now I want to move into a different topic, which is very important as well, which has to do also with the form of poetry, right? We've talked about the influence now of these multiple platforms, online, printed, etc. But we also think about the interaction between performance and digital platforms, and then the printed media. So, Susanna, I'm coming to you now. As your study has illustrated convincingly, social media and algorithmic aesthetics have radically changed today's poetry landscape. And if you could say also something more about what you mean by algorithmic aesthetics, because I find it a very interesting and crucial concept. So the production, publication, and dissemination of reception of poetry has changed. Do you think that poetry journals have also been transformed by the digitalization of poetry? And if yes, how?
Thanks. Yeah, so I think we're already hearing in how these editors are describing the pressure from social media, from digital platforms, the way that the structures of journals may or may not shift, but where the audiences are. And I love Quaz's description of meeting the readers where they are and then bringing them back as a way of thinking about how the movement from, say, bookstores or physical spaces of collaboration and connection, circulation into digital platforms doesn't have to mean then the exclusion of those print material spaces or the digital containers as core spaces of community, but rather this sort of distributed structure. Stephanie Santana, who recently published a book on fiction and forums and social media in Southern Africa, describes it as para-virtual networks, worlds that are connected both in person and online to kind of resist the either or pressures. In terms of how digital media is affecting literary form and poetic form in particular, I do see a real shift in the pressure on poets and poetry. You know, we've had these three editors describe so brilliantly, Leifangi being so invested in helping produce and promote the best poetry possible, shaping these poems that are already so brilliant through small shifts and promoting them on these platforms. And yet, the pressures in terms of how so many people like Quaz's students are engaging these poems and individual poets are not shaped by human determination necessarily, direct human action, but as much by curation algorithms. Excuse me. Siren, I don't know if that's coming through on your end. As much by the curation algorithms that structure what posts show up on whose feeds when. And those curation algorithms, though they're built to some extent by individuals, they're not controlled necessarily by people whose primary interest is poetry. And they often kind of take on lives of their own through these machine learning structures. And so what that means is that there's a pressure to constantly produce new work, which is simply not how poetry works, right? We know poetry benefits from slowness, from time. It takes time. But to maintain an audience online, you need, on social media platforms, you need something new pretty regularly, especially something like Instagram or TikTok, where that engagement and recency is really important. It's also often a pressure towards the immediately digestible, right? Something big and bold and clear, because you're scrolling through on a screen, something to grab someone's attention, and these algorithms want you to linger, but only for so long, so that you keep moving. And that structure of flow, as opposed to the set apart poem that we might imagine on the page or in the moment of contemplation, that does change the pressure on poets, and I imagine on editors. So I know some poets will sort of take one poem that they have that's elaborate and complicated and remediate it in all these different ways, exactly like Quaz is describing, right? You perform it once, and then a couple of weeks later, you post an excerpt from it, and then a couple of weeks later, you post a different, maybe an excerpt from it posted over or written over an evocative image, right? And in that way, you can maintain audience connection. And there's this kind of pressure that I see towards branding, right? We're following the container of the poetry, but also the container of the poet. And this is, I think, a bit of a shift away from this understanding of poetry as a transcendent form and into the commercial structures around poetry as a commodity. Obviously, when it's a print work, it's always a commodity, it always has been, but the way that it's conceived and encountered shifts. And I see this also more broadly connected to the financial pressures that Cindy mentioned, and it varies a lot depending on where you are. So for instance, so a lot of poets may find some poets, I should say, may find routes to monetization and financial support that otherwise are unavailable to individual writers through YouTube, right? Where a certain number of views will start slowly to accrue payments. But in Malawi, where I work, and actually in most of Africa, these platforms aren't monetized. You literally cannot make money from the work that you post there. I think that's not true in South Africa, which is phenomenal, but it's unusual, and it has to do with the way that individual companies interact with like financial systems in countries, so that even if you reach audiences, the money, the financial support has to come from somewhere else. So we're seeing a shift in how we talk about poetry, the kinds of questions we want to be asking, and how individual poems and poets kind of circulate through and engage in poetry, and engage with audiences. So that like we can also see, you know, even as individual journals might be pushing towards multilingual, maybe improving and engaging more and more languages, there is an Anglocentrism to the internet and the way that it's structured because of those platforms. So all of these are really entwining in ways that I think push towards a poetry that is multimodal, very rapidly produced and engaged, energetic, emotive, really powerful, but supports the kind of work that like does get promoted by social search engines. And we need to think about that, especially I think with the rise of generative AI. It's actually, and I don't know if you all have found this, but I'm finding it's becoming harder and harder to access materials outside of what like Google already thinks I'm gonna want as, you know, a woman in Washington, DC. And it's like usually wrong. And so there's more, it's that much harder and that much more important to be maintaining all of these different structures and spaces.
Does anyone want to respond to Susanna, or maybe comment on, or otherwise, I think what she also mentioned here has to do with the pressure that I think you might feel as editors, no? Because we're looking at a radically different scenario, no? Not just for poetry, but for literature, for arts, for communication in general, no? Where the main space for communication nowadays is the digital one. But now, let me also be a bit conservative, right? Now, do we want also the poetry journals to be absorbed and co-opted and englobed in, like, incorporated into this space and respond to the dynamics that she has illustrated very well, the algorithmic aesthetics, etc.? Or perhaps, even in the future, poetry journal might have, you know, a function as something that exists in a niche, that's something that exists for a very selected, you know, and small readership, as something that does not follow, you know, these trends. Or perhaps, and that's maybe my take, but I would like to hear from you because obviously you're more invested than me in this. Is the poetry journal of the future a journal that seeks to, you know, expand its format and be more interactive and integrate with technologies? One journal that doesn't simply replicate the aesthetics of the printed page. So how do you feel about that? How do you feel about this pressing, you know, this pressure actually that exists for an editor to make the journal like popular, viral, etc., against having the journal maybe more focus on content, on quality, etc., but less visible online? I don't know who wants to go first. Oh, that looks like my cat Shao.
Yeah, I'll jump in. I think it's something that I'll echo what Susanna mentioned now. You know, the idea of being pushed towards functioning as a sort of multimodal thing that exists in different spaces. The world is almost by default forcing all of us in that direction, right? The idea of hyper visibility. I need to see new coin on Facebook every day so that I can care about new coin on you know what I mean? And I like that you foregrounded it by saying you're going to be a purist, because I think as a purist, that's not what we want. You know, but also we also understand that there's literary journals that are over 100 years old based on historic universities that at a whim funding gets cut and they don't exist anymore. So what do we do to confront what the times are offering us? And I think that is exactly the question that each editor here has to ask themselves, in terms of what they want to carve out for the publication. How do I want this thing to exist? How do I want this thing to live in how does it fit into the zeitgeist of the day? How does it fit into the communal library of the day? Where's the communal library of the day situated? Do I care to go there? Do I care to put my poem and the poems that I'm publishing and the people that are submitting in that communal library, And I think that's exactly what we are grappling with right now. It is a world that is changing so fast. 50 years ago, I think someone asked the same thing about televisions. Should we care about TV? We should all be reading newspapers. 20 years ago, everyone was saying, hey, you guys are all on your phones. We should stop doing this. And the world doesn't care about how romantic we are and how romantically attached we are to this idea. The world is changing rapidly. And I think that is the work of every editor. It's to find out where this currently exists in this rapidly changing world. And are you going to be a rock, standing resolute and allow the stream to bash against you, or are you going to jump in and see where this ultimately takes you? And it is a very hard decision to make, because on some end, you do not want to water down any of the, the quality of the work that you are presenting to the world. You also don't want to turn it into a caricature or turn it into, like you say, like a brand thing where the essence of what you are presenting to the world is attached to a personality or a brand or image or, a thing that is revered and popular. But really at the heart of it, our work here is to foreground poetry. And how do we foreground poetry in a world that's ever changing, that doesn't want to consume it in a way that we have been presenting it to them in the last 100 years? For me, it's easy because we've been existing in the digital space, and I think you are kind of forced to adapt to what the digital space is throwing at you if you are existing there already, But if you think about traditional print journals, how do they navigate a world where kids are now dead doom scrolling and they want to read things on their phones? Me, as a person that loves reading, I've got more books on my phone that I'm reading than the books that are on my shelves. I'm literally using my phone as a device to read through the books that I've got on my list to read. So even someone that has their heart and their foundation set in the purest, most sincerest form of love for literature, which is reading a book and just quietly enjoying it, I'm now finding myself doing it in a different way as well. And I think that is the conversation that we are having with ourselves constantly. What value does this new innovation add if I am changing? And I'll be honest with you as well, like even now as we were talking and we were talking, I'm like, it would really be strange if New Coin was on TikTok, doing dances and because that's also what the algorithm wants from you, right? So those are the questions you are grappling with. Those are the decisions that you are grappling with. But I think we are creatives in general are dynamic people, and we find ways to adapt and become what the moment needs us to be, and that's what we need to figure in terms of our path and in terms of how we are curating the work of these journals.
I think editors have a very difficult job to do today, because in the past it was much easier to identify your readership and work around that. Today it's much wider, it's much more complex, and so you have to somehow, you're also a poet, right? You're also a lover of poetry, so you want to bridge, the aesthetic of the poetry that you like with the culture of the digital tools. And so I think it's a very thin line, that you walk on. It's a very difficult job. So maybe Sindiswa, what is your experience? I know you also as a poet with a fine eye, for poetry, and now it's a wide platform that you are dealing with. So how do you navigate around it?
Yeah, I mean, I really love what Quaz was saying, and also Susanna. If we had a donor that gave us like R1 million or something, then I wouldn't even feel, then we wouldn't, then it would all be open access as far as I'm concerned. It would just be freely available, right? But there are costs, every time an issue is printed, it costs almost 20,000 Rand to get 300 copies of the book, That doesn't just materialize. It's not manna from heaven. That requires getting different funders, that requires subscriptions, that requires us on the editorial team working for breadcrumbs, and weekends are lost on there's a whole machinery behind the finished thing. A little plug here. So like it's paid for, and so then you do need to start thinking about like, how do we work with this, because we do need to somehow try to make the money back. We're not really in it for profit. But I do think that the digital turn that we're in, the digital age that we're in, is wonderful to a certain extent, because I like the idea that we can post poems on social media and then you get to have a taste of it. I like the idea that things can be open access. I'm interested in, like, in the future, asking a few of our featured poets to read their poems so that we can like put with their face and in their voice, reading on social media, because there's nothing more delicious than hearing a poem in the poet's voice, for instance. I've never really been hostile when it comes to the way in which the digital world is taking over. I remember many professors at university were very bent out of shape when it came to Audible. I love Audible. I love hearing Beloved in Toni Morrison's voice. I experienced it completely different, So I like the ways in which social media can make things more available, it's because we're always trying to make sure that the book is not too expensive, trying to keep it at a particular price point so that it's not going to break the bank, because people in this economy, we don't have money it feels like buying a book is a luxury these days. But if you're going to make the book 400 Rand or 500 Rand, no one can have access to it. And so there's something about the digital era that I'm really appreciating. But then it requires that we have to wear multiple hats, and we have to suddenly become social media managers. We've got to start thinking about algorithms, which we don't really think about algorithms, but we have started doing things like the cover reveal, right? So we build up this anticipation that new contrast is coming out, and there's the cover reveal. But I think another way in which we still maintain community is not just through social media. I think it's also, we've really committed ourselves to like having launches where we bring people all under one roof, and there's readings that happen, and then we build community, and then we see each other for the next launch, and then there are more people, and people bring their friends and their family, and so around the city you can start bringing in and building community. And the physical book is never undermined in favor of all things digital. That there's nothing better than the printed page, flipping through the leaves of a book, leafing through the pages of a book. But I also just don't think that there's any reason to be hostile towards a sort of a hybridized way of disseminating the work. Yeah.
And I think you've done a great job in what you said, like at the end now, in also blending, the work of as an editor, but also as a, social media manager, but also organizing live events. It reminds me also of what the Red Wheelbarrow has been doing, having those platforms for readings, and then also organizing open mics and readings in person around Cape Town. So I think that community building, process, it's happening with the journal, maybe with the printed version of the journal, maybe even at the center of it, but only as part of a bigger picture.
And I mean, sorry, just to jump in, I mean, also the thing, I don't think that one of us can really avoid the pull towards the podcast. The podcast space is huge. I love a good podcast, but I mean, we even see, the Book Lounge has a podcast, and that's a bookstore.
Yeah.
They've got a podcast. The New Yorker has a podcast, and I mean, there's something really. I mean, everybody and their auntie and the goldfish and the dog has a podcast. Everybody's got a podcast, but there's something about. I don't think it's something to fear. I think that there's a way that it can all work together. Yeah.
Yeah, I saw one of your recent podcasts for the Open Book Festival. I really liked it. No, it was new. I mean, I never saw you with that in that role, but it really worked. And no, thanks. And let me ask Vangi. Vangi, before we started, you were telling me how how much your hands are full already with the traditional role of an editor. But do you have in mind also to do something like some of the things that your colleagues have said, maybe podcast or maybe moving into a new direction?
I mean, so I really want to kind of speak alongside Cindy on this, because I think that it is inevitable to enter into this digital kind of world and to not fear it and to kind of approach it as an opportunity, but also language it in a way that's true to what your journal is and how your journal kind of lives in this world. And so I think for us, one of the things that I was really kind of excited about, first of all, in terms of thinking of how to open up New Coin in readership, but also in embracing different types of poetry, was to open up what kind of, so that like the different forms of poetry that exist inside the journal are quite vast. And so we're having a beautiful kind of poetic conversation inside the journal itself, where the language, the form, we're moving into this idea of how does English sit in our different bodies, and our varying bodies across this region. And so I think that that's how we're trying to make sure that the journal itself in the pages kind of speaks to this idea of moving into 2025 and beyond. And then also thinking about what kind of conversation we'd like to have around the covers, and if we think about um, how each kind of editor has their own style, aesthetic in terms of the covers, and what kind of covers that would like as in what kind of cover aesthetic would make sense for how we're trying to move the journal forward. And then once we were able to think about that, we were able to then move into how do we get onto social media platforms? How do we think about our Facebook page and which hasn't been active in a while, and making it active? How do we think about um, like as in being new on Instagram, and what will that look like? And I'm terrible in terms of curating an Instagram page. You know how some people have these perfectly curated Instagram pages, and that's definitely not something that is my strong point. It's definitely an area of development. But thankfully, we have Umilisa, who is a lot more proficient in that sense. And so we're going to take baby steps in how we move into the kind of uh, actively pursuing the creative imagination of readers outside of what the current subscription looks like. And also because if we don't do that, the journal will die. The journal is 60 years old now, 61 years old. So we have to think about how to keep it alive, how to make sure that it's not running at a loss, that because we're putting all of this work and the numbers are low. So how do we make sure that we get the readership up? I mean, for the first time, we're going to actually be launching here at Poetry Africa um, on Thursday the 10th. And so that's very exciting. We will be in conversation with Kyle, who's the previous editor. And so trying to do physical launches outside of the Makanda region and outside of just kind of the Rhodes community. But how do we create a physical community and a physical presence? And so I think we're thinking about what growth looks like in our own language in a way that is true to the kind of new coin voice, because like as in it would be strange to see new coin on TikTok, but it's not strange to see Vuyakazi Ngemdu reading her poem on Instagram, for example. And so we can definitely try hard, and there's room for growth in that sense.
Thank you, Vangi. Yeah, definitely we live in a fast changing world, and that obviously impacts what we do also as poets. And poetry is more and more multimodal. So I think that this was a very interesting conversation for me because it made me realize that the poets that I've been seeing working on the ground for so many years are very committed into taking poetry to the next level in this age of rapid transformation. And I think that our time has come almost to an end. I would just like to end with one round of maybe announcements, or how do we reach your journal? How do we reach you? I know that New Coin has now a window that ends on the 15th of October. Am I correct? For the upcoming issue. Then I will ask you about that. And what about New Contrast and Poetry Potion? How do writers and readers reach you? And Susanna, perhaps any plan to come to South Africa anytime soon, or where is your research going? Just a final round of announcement for our viewers and readers, and then we can wrap it up. I don't know who wants to start. Maybe Vangi with New Coin and open window now for the new issue.
Great. Yes. So we are celebrating just kind of the growth of New Coin through voices of Black and Brown women, all inclusive in how we define women, with living in or from Southern Africa. We're looking for, the theme is This Body Cannot Forget, and we're looking for poems that just kind of speak across the board. That is running until the 15th of October. The open window is until the submission window is until the 15th of October. We're also going to be launching 10th of October at Poetry Africa, so we're really excited about that. And we will be having mini launches around the country that will be kind of organized by some of the contributors. So what we're going to do is we're going to be making visible volume 60 and 61. So both issues, that Kyle's last two issues and my first issue, to ensure that we're really kind of celebrating this new decade of New Coin. And we're also going to be more available in independent bookstores around the country. And we do sit on the ISEA Rhodes University page, so you can access us through there if you wish to subscribe, and if you also want to submit, and also if you want to access previous issues.
Thank you, Vangi. We look forward to these events, especially in Pretoria and Joburg. We definitely attend. Cindy, you're also launching on the 2nd of October, issue 209 of New Contrast. You want to tell us about that and how to contribute to the journal? Maybe Cindy's got connection. Oh, did you hear me, Cindy?
Yes, I wish I had a hard copy with me, but it's actually, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, I can.
Yeah, I wish I had a hard copy. it's the copy's currently at the printers, but we are launching 209. We'll also be celebrating 65 years of New Contrast. It will be happening in town, in Cape Town, at the Museum of Dogs, and so we hope that people will join. We will also then be announcing the submission window at the event when we open it up and how long it will run for. You can contact us via our website, newcontrast.net. And yeah, so the submission windows will be open soon. And then we'll also be celebrating the fact that we are doing a special issue at New Contrast in collaboration, issue that focuses on the speculative imagination within the Global South. And so it'll be focused on speculative fiction, poetry, visual cultures, short stories. And so we're really excited to get that going. And it's going to be a lovely collaboration. We hope that anybody that's interested in speculating about the future, as well as the sort of ethical dimensions of what the digital age and what the future holds, we hope that when we give you all that info, you
Thank you, Cindy. Sounds extremely interesting and always pushing the journal in new territories. So thank you for that. Susanna, one last word for our viewers around the world.
Wow, this has been an amazing conversation. So thank you all. So I'm really interested in these questions of how digital media pressures us as readers, as writers, and it's so phenomenal to hear how you all are thinking about what it means to live in a moment where this is simply an inevitability, and how Vangi, your description of what it means to show up as ourselves, as what the journal intends to be, within structures and platforms that may not be built for that, but that are engaged in it inevitably. My current or forthcoming research is really actually interested in how global financial systems shape kind of the space of opportunity for writers, for poets and theater makers, and how in a world that's structured around debt and the continued extraction of wealth, writers groups, collaborative organizations have always, not always, but for a very long time, offered alternative forms of organizing. And so that's where I'm thinking towards. Networked poetics, I think, is excitingly in conversation with these works and these ideas. It's unfortunately not available for distribution in South Africa right now. This is a conversation I'm having with my publisher, but it is available online. So if you're reading on your phone, you can get it that way. I was last in Joburg a few months ago, but I'm hoping to be back next winter. So let's be in touch about possibly working towards that. And if there's more conversations to be had around the future of digital media, poetry, AI, funding, finances, the institutions that support this work, and the challenges, you can reach me via email at my Howard University email, which is susanna.sachs@howard.edu. So I'll wrap there, but thank you all. I really love this conversation and appreciate the opportunity.
And thank you, Susanna, for your incredibly interesting contribution. And we look forward to seeing you here and hopefully organize an event with you when you are in South Africa. And let's wrap up with editor-in-chief, but also co-curator of Poetry Africa, longtime friend and poet Quaz. One message for us, Quaz, before we wrap it up?
Just a quick congratulations to Cindy, Vangile, Susanna on your new book as well, on your study and your research work. But I just sat here now. Usually I'm in a panel and people, I'm like, oh, Poetry Potion is almost 20 years. And people go, ooh, that's so old. And then you said, Sindiswa said 209 copies in 65 years and Vangi said 60 years. And I realized there's obviously something that they saw in you to take the helm of that institutions. And I mean, I've read your work and I know your work. So I just want to acknowledge you as well for the important role that you guys are taking over there, you know. Yeah, it's exciting time. It's a beautiful time for literary journals, just in terms of where we are going, how we're presenting things, but also with these editors that we know at the helm. I think we are in for quite a bit of a treat. With Poetry Potion, we publish new poems every single day. You guys can visit poetrypotion.com. 10 a.m. in the morning, we publish a prompt to help you a bit, but a new poem every single day. And if you want to submit, you can just go onto the website. The submission form is right there, and add your voice to that beautiful archive of poetry we have on Poetry Potion. And hopefully one day we'll have 65 years behind us, and yeah.
I'm sure you will. I'm sure you will. We'll support you. And guys, thank you. Keep supporting poetry journals. Keep reading, keep writing, keep submitting. These editors are amazing. And I'm talking to the viewers and the readers and the poets now. They'll definitely will support you in your journey as writer, as poets, etc. So thank you again. Thank you, Susanna. Thank you, Cindy. Thank you, Vangi. Thank you, Quaz. And thank you, Poetry Africa. Bye.
Thank you.
Ciao, ciao.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all.